something which is we see increasingly happening these days, which is aggregation of large amounts of data at different levels, particularly which data being collected and stored and perhaps being used by government. The idea is this: a lot of this data could be used to serve its citizens. For example, businesses can use it to apply their services better and advertise better to the populace. Government can use it to better serve their citizens by targeting who is poor, who needs what, and so directly taking what they require to them by knowing where they are and what they need. So as you all know, there's a lot of data being collected these days. We are all connected, and this, which means that there's many things that digitize, and which means that somebody could potentially store it and use it for good or worse. So that's the big idea. Then we thought, I mean, how do we get people together thinking about these questions? So under the umbrella of the JustData project, there were three big things which we basically categorize it. So algorithms and access to big data. Does it increase or decrease social inequality? That's one of the first questions we want to understand. What is happening to transparency? You know, what is happening to all this data collected? How much data are they saying they're collecting? Are they collecting more or less? What are the frameworks available for basically using this data and so forth? So how responsible are people when they're accessing and storing this data? So that's the second question, and larger questions are essentially how can big data be used to actually research and be useful for big societal questions. So as you can see, the project basically we don't have a logo yet, but the idea is to have how can we use data to have a just and inclusive society, and the question is it being used for having a just and inclusive society? So this particular today's workshop is falls in right in the middle of all these things, and in fact today it's a really happening thing in India. Every day it's front page news, and so it is a timely workshop because it brings a lot of people involved in this process together. It's a good platform for them to discuss amongst themselves and relay back hopefully promises and also potential concerns. So we have so the other act I will let Usha, who's unfortunately could not join us physically here, but who's joining us via video conferencing. So I will let her talk a little bit more about the context of this workshop today, but the context is essentially in one word how the recent Aadhaar Act in India, which is essentially a way of identifying people with biometric information, and how they want to link this up with all kinds of transactions, even buying airline tickets or train tickets and so forth. One would need to have this number every time you buy a ticket. So that means it's not just it may mean that it's not just used for providing better rations and subsidies, but also could be used potentially to know where people are, which may have other consequences. So that's, I think you see that there are two sides to this big data. One is to have it could potentially empower people, because digitizing data means you can access data no matter where it is. You can file a freedom of under the right to information. You can file a petition, and then you can get access to this data. At the same time, access to already people on the government, and they actually have all this together. So what can they do with it? So that's why the big hopes and hazards. So just to tell you, give you an overview, we'll have a few more minutes when Usha will set up the stage for us, and then we'll break for coffee, and then come back, and then go into the first session, and then this session will set up a little bit more about what we're talking about today, what's happening currently in India particularly, and across the world. And also we'll come back, we'll break for lunch again, come back again, regroup ourselves into a second panel, and the final panel would be basically all the panelists available to answer the questions and discuss amongst themselves. And that's at 3:30 this afternoon. So we are fortunate to have a lot of people today here, and including several of them from India. We are lucky to have a lot of them in this context, so this is great, and I won't spend too much time here. I actually want to give Usha the floor.
If it's okay, maybe I'll just mention some of the major issues in this, and then take a little moment for talking about the UID project per se.
Sure, sure.
I think, yeah. So I think some of the things that we need to worry about and concern ourselves with. The first is this idea that technology is changing the world in ways where we can't expect any of the norms that we had built up for the world that existed to continue into this. One example, just one example of that is to say that privacy is dead, long live privacy. So that's just one illustration. But that privacy is irrelevant and impossible in a time of technology. I think we may need to question this. The second is the datafication of people, where all administrations so far were concerned with people and peoples. Now we worry about data, and data has become the name of the game now. The third is there is a way in which governance is being set up against rights. So you can either have rights or you can have governance. And technology and data together are supposedly going to give us good governance in search of which we will have to give up many rights. And rights are quite irrelevant if you can't have good governance. I mean, that's the kind of opposites that's being set up. The other really interesting thing I find is that this is coming at a time when it's, where many countries, and India for sure, we've been grappling with this extraordinary corruption among persons who have power, and especially those who have state power, and those who either are the power themselves or who share their power with others. This new way of looking at how data can be used and how it should be collected and all the rest of it raises the question: who commits the wrong? Who commits the offense? Who is committing violations? Because the focus is moving from people watching, making the state transparent and accountable, and those who share state power being transparent and accountable, and those who are economic centers of power needing to become more accountable. We move to people becoming answerable to those who are in power, especially because it's come at a time where in the last 10-15 years we've had extraordinary stories of extraordinary amounts of corruption. I mean, there was one time where I just tried putting, from 1992 to 2015, I said, let me just put down the figures of the extent of corruption in each scam that has been coming up. And I realized, of course, that my arithmetic is so bad that I don't know how many zeros come after what they've said. So it's really exploded. And in the midst of that, it is people who are being put under surveillance. And I find that both fascinating and deeply disturbing. The question, therefore, also is who watches whom, and what does this kind of technology produce for us? Then we have this in the Indian context. We've clearly seen that either this whole system is being brought in with no law at all, which means that whoever has the power can do whatever they want, or when a law is brought in, it's brought in a way which completely nullifies the ability to debate. It negates the value of a parliamentary democracy. It makes the constitution like a tool, or it's a tool for people who want to use it or not, as they choose. So illegality is one of those things writ large on this project. As interestingly is this idea of coercion, because we are not just talking in this era, we are not just talking about information which is out there being used in multiple ways. It is creating information through forcing individuals, through forcing citizens, residents, migrants, whoever, forcing them to part with information so that we leave digital footprints everywhere. And the idea, the capabilities that are being created are to tag, to profile, to converge data, to label, and generally to put under surveillance. So these are terms that are becoming very common in our lingo now, and that's not a very healthy sign. The other thing which Aruna has been talking about for the longest time, and she alerted us to this, she said, stop talking about technology like it's neutral. There's nothing neutral about technology. There are data controllers. There are people who control the technology, and that's going to determine how technology produces the person. So technology is not infallible. technology is not neutral, and technology is not without controllers. So when we think of big data, or we think of data, or we think of technology, and I think it's not a great idea to conflate digitization with these kinds of uses of technology. Uh, then we need to recognize what technology is, and what it is projected as being. Here we found, for instance, that untested technologies are being rolled out, and we're being told that it will sort itself out over time because technology is improving every day. This is not happening only in relation to in relation to the kind of biometrics that already exist. We were told that even in relation to DNA, where they wanted to create a DNA database of as much of the population as they could get. We are still being told that if fingerprint and iris is not enough, they might think of asking for a DNA too. So it's not, things that would have seemed ridiculous yesterday are being treated as the new normal. And that's another thing. What pierces the picture on all this is that the relationship between the state and the citizen is changing, not only because of these structures that are coming in, but also because of the interest that private industry has and the relationship that they have now developed with the state. For me, the introduction to how this came about was through reading Heather Brooks's book, where she just has a paragraph where she says in Lisbon, in 2002, when the European Union countries were meeting, they decided that they would help technology companies in finding their business and doing their work, whatever, and that they would get something from it too. What that relationship is and what they would give each other became, I think, most open with Edward Snowden. So Snowden is not just about the NSA and about the FICA, but it's about the relationship between the state and the corporation too. And prior to Snowden, there was an earlier occasion when when the leak kind of became public in 2005, 5-ish, and the Bush administration retrospectively changed the law so the companies would not have had to reveal information to their clientele about the breaches that had occurred by their giving this information to the NSA. So this kind of collaboration, to use a kind word, between the state and private interest is one of the things that it makes this whole thing a much more dangerous game than we would have imagined could happen. We are often told that this is producing solutions, and if we want to object to this, then we should suggest what can be a solution in its place. And it's interesting what we are being told that this is a solution for. It is a solution for. It's a whole list. So it is a solution for corruption, for leakage, for terror, for black money, for money laundering, for crime, for illegal migration. It's a solution for bringing in efficiency. It will make cashless possible, which is just the greatest thing that can happen to the universe. So so having said that it is a solution, which of course it is not, it's producing more problems than it is providing solutions. Having projected it as a solution, now we are being told that we've got to offer another solution in its place if we want this to be even questioned beyond this. And I just want to say that you have people with you, experts in the solutions that have in fact been provided, which includes decentralization, which includes transparency through something like the Right to Information Act, and who've been working on people becoming part of the solution and not allowing for people to become subjects of state exercise. So these are fundamental norms, and norms are being thrown to the wind. So it's not only about surveillance, it's also about, it's not only about surveillance and transparency, it's also about, there are a number of things that are being taken away in this process, and that includes a number of notions like dignity, like the right to citizenship and the idea of citizenship, notions of stigma. And if I were to just to give you one illustration of what's happening under the UID project, where they've now got a notification which says that women who are rescued from prostitution, before they get rehabilitated, they'll have to have the UID number attached to it. Otherwise, they won't be entitled to rehabilitation. So the idea that anonymity should just vanish Because all this, if you want anonymity, if you want confidentiality, if you want secrecy, if you want privacy, then it must be because you're planning to do wrong. And that wrong should never be permitted. I want to make a declaration here that I believe the times I enjoy life most is when I'm doing wrong. So I'm not giving that up for anything. And I really think it's a different thing from committing a crime. But even committing a crime, since crime too is a majoritarian construct, I'm not sure. For instance, in India, homosexuality is still a crime. And I don't see, why people shouldn't be homosexuals because, or have sex in the same, whatever, same sex, sex, just because somebody thinks it should be a crime. So there are many ways in which these ideas of crime, of wrongdoing, of what needs to be surveyed, all these are negotiated in societies all the time. And that negotiation is being reduced through bringing in projects like this. Just one last word on what is happening right now. We've had a case that's pending in the court, and I have the story of the earth spider, which some of you must read. It, because it's Hungary, I have to tell you, it comes from a Hungarian writer who later, of course, moved to England and wrote in English. That's how I've read him. But it's a nice story. He writes of what happened. This is John Nites, when he went to Japan, and he says he went to see the kabuki. And as anyone who's been to kabuki knows, it's a fascinating art form, but it's also difficult for people who don't know it to know whether it's beginning or it's in the middle or it's getting over or whatever. So he talks about how the story of the earth spider that he saw in a kabuki show, and he talks about how this earth spider had to be caught by the ronin, and it had to be killed, and so they were chasing it, and the way they chased it was to sit around a fire and sing for 18 minutes with a violin, 16 minutes in velvet clothes, 14 minutes in something else, singing all the time that we need to hurry. We can't waste any time. We have to catch the earth spider. And the story goes on. I mean, it's written in many places. It's real fun reading it, so you should read it. But it ends with the story. In the last scene, you have the waiting for, they're waiting for something and they're singing and they're saying that we need to hurry, we need to do something in a hurry. And the earth spider finally gets out of the cave, comes out, and then starts dancing all around them, and they continue just to talk. So finally, the earth spider just curls up and dies. This is the story of the Indian Supreme Court on the UID case.